Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Nicki LaFoille, and in this video, I'm going to be teaching you all about reverse applique. So reverse applique is a fun fabric embellishment technique, kind of like a twist on the traditional applique. So things are a little bit different, the steps are a little bit different, and there's a ton of different ways to do it and to apply it to your projects. So I'm going to go through a couple of different options, different ways to apply it, and you can choose what works best for you and your projects. So if you are watching live, you can ask any questions that you may have, type them into the comment section, and I'll see them and get any questions answered. There is a little PDF for you to download as well that has just a description of the three different types of reverse applique I'm going to be walking you through today. So you just have, those broken out into the steps so you can kind of a quick reference for you to go back to and see those steps. So you can scan that QR code on your screen to download that PDF or check for the link in the comment section. So let's talk about reverse applique. So with traditional applique, your fabric is placed on top of your project fabric. So this red fabric is my applique fabric and is just placed right on top of the right side of the project fabric, and then it is stitched down. With reverse applique, the fabric goes behind, goes on the wrong side of the fabric, and then that main fabric is cut away to reveal the applique fabric behind. So actually, let me show this one. So this guy, we have, I'm gonna switch my camera. This is my light is a little bit too intense. So here is one example. So the fabric being behind your main fabric kind of creates a little bit of a different depth to it. And this is the folded edge reverse applique. So my edges are all finished. It looks really nicely finished. Here is an example of raw edge reverse applique where the edges, where that fabric, so my applique fabric is on the wrong side. So where my main fabric has been cut away, it is left raw, and I've just stitched that with a straight stitch. And that is um, kind of a nice technique to use when you're doing this on knits as well, because knits don't ravel. And I actually, on a lot of times when I'm doing this, the raw edge reverse applique, I will kind of want these raw edges to fray a little bit. So that's why I just do a straight stitch, leave those raw edges alone, and I will get, a little bit of a frayed look um, at those raw edges. And then let's show an example of is the other type of reverse applique that is in the PDF. That is satin stitch. So this is my zigzag stitch is a little bit open, more open than a satin stitch on this one. But the satin stitch is just it's a short zigzag stitch. So here's one that looks a little more like a satin stitch. It's a little bit closer together on my lace reverse applique. So the satin stitch is just a really tight zigzag stitch that goes over the raw edges of your main fabric to encase those raw edges, and it makes a nice clean look. And I used a variegated thread here to add even a little bit um, more visual interest. So the thread that you use can really add to the look as well. So applique and reverse applique is not only a fun way to embellish your fabric, it is also can be used for um, to cover up stains and holes. So if you had a little hole or a stain in your jeans, you could employ this technique and have not only a fun little pop of color, but you get rid of that stain as well. And here's an example of a reverse applique. So it's done using the satin stitched method that I go through in that PDF, but instead of a satin stitch, I used a decorative stitch. So you can look at those decorative stitches that you have built into your machine, and any that have sort of right to left motion with the needle, so it's kind of, wide enough to encase those raw edges. You can use that for this technique, and I used a variegated thread here as well, so I thought that looked pretty cool. So let's start by looking at the raw edge applique, reverse applique. And this is really a simple technique to do. And for the shape, you can do any sort of shape you want. You can do just like a little circle if you're just, you know, taking out a stain, or you can make it into something like a shape, like a heart or a star. And I just freehand drew these. But you can, of course, print out a template and trace it if you're looking to be a little bit more precise. And Kurt is joining us from Dayton, Ohio. Hello, Kurt. Thanks for tuning in. So here is one that I'm going to be cutting out for you this morning. This star shape that I just freehand drew. So there's my applique fabric on the wrong side. So it is the right side of my applique fabric is against the wrong side of my main fabric. And I drew my star shape on the right side of my main fabric and stitched over my lines. So I just took my pen, this is a heat removable pen, and I just drew a star, stitched along the outer edge, and then hit it with the iron to remove my marks. I used my variegated thread for that as well. And now to cut this out, you have to be really careful because we don't want to cut the applique fabric. So you have to kind of separate the layers. So make sure your layers are separated, and then I'm going to make just a little clip right in the center of my main fabric and sliding my scissors between the main fabric and the applique fabric. I'm just going to trim this outer fabric away. And you don't want to go too close to the stitching because it is possible that this outer fabric could, pull away from the stitching if you get too close. So I'm going, a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch. If you're using a fabric that has a looser weave, you want to stay even further away from the stitching. I'm getting right up into the points of my star. And as that is coming away, you can see my applique fabric being revealed from behind. So you can use some really decorative fabrics as your applique fabric. In my one example there, I used a pre-embellished fabric that had little rhinestones on it, and that looked really fun coming out from behind my main fabric. Now one more point of my star. And like I said, you can do this on knit fabric as well. Just make sure that you are using a knit applique fabric behind so you maintain that stretch. So there is my raw edge reverse applique. So we've got the raw edges left, we've got our stitching line as a little decorative touch, and then we've got that fun print fabric coming from behind. And then we can trim away, the excess from around the stitching on the back as well. And you have just a little fun pop of a different fabric. So that's really easy. Now let's take a look at, let's do our satin stitched example. So I used lace for that one. That offered a really fun look, like a little see-through panel. So for the satin stitched method, because you want the stitch to go over the raw edge, you want to cut out your shape first. And you'll want to add a little interfacing to the wrong side so that this raw edge, it maintains its shape, it doesn't get stretched out of shape as you are doing this technique. So we want to cut out first because if you were to do this as we did our raw edge and stitch your shape first, if you were then to try to cut it out, you would have some of those threads showing on the outside of your stitch. So we want to cut it out first so that our stitch can go over the edge and really encase it. So if I had a little stain right there, put some interfacing on, cut it away from around the stain or the hole, and then take some fabric. And we're going to center that under our opening. And then I'm going to select a zigzag stitch on my machine, and I'm going to shorten it so that it is tighter together. And then I want the left swing of my needle to just go over that raw edge. I'm going to just go slow as I curve around this gentle oval that I've cut out of my fabric. I want to make sure that my needle is in the right position as I make adjustments to these curves. And like I said, you can choose a decorative stitch for this. It creates a really fun and different and unique look to your reverse applique, something a little bit unexpected. And I'm just using a white thread so that you can see, but you could also use a thread that matches your main fabric. You know, you could cut a little bit of fabric that is similar to your main fabric and then thread that is similar. If you were trying to, you know, create a little patch for a hole or a stain, but you didn't want to bring attention to it. So this, like I said, this technique is really good for mending. So I'm coming up on where I started. Whoops, I didn't quite catch my raw edge there. Okay, so there is I got a little too far away from the edge there, but there my fabric is attached. I'd hit that with the iron a little bit and have a nice fun pop of fabric coming from behind my main fabric. So another really easy technique. And again, my zigzag stitch here is not quite a satin stitch. Satin stitch, the threads lay right next to each other. But for the purposes of time, I left my zigzag stitch a little bit wider. So there is a nice technique. And then the last technique we're going to talk about is our folded edge. And this is a really fun one because it looks so nice and finished. And there's a lot of different things you can do to make this work for you. So we are going to need, in addition to, so here's my main fabric, here's my applique fabric that's going to go behind. You're going to need another scrap of either fabric or interfacing for this, something lightweight. And if you use interfacing, we are not fusing this interfacing. We need to leave it unattached. So you'll want to place your scrap of fabric or interfacing on the wrong side of your main fabric and draw um, your applique shape, your hole shape, your opening shape, whatever that may be. If it's a just a little circle to take care of, a hole or a stain, or if you're doing a certain shape, you want to trace that. And then we are going to stitch on this line using a straight stitch. So I'm going to hop over to my machine. And then here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to start anywhere, stitching over my drawn line. And you could, again, print out a template if you would like. I just kind of freehand sketched this heart. I'm stopping right at the point at the top of that heart to pivot. And with my needle down, I'm just pivoting around those curves a little bit at a time. I want it to remain a nice smooth curve with no sharp points. Okay. So there I am stitched. I deviated a little bit from my drawn line on one side, so I tried to mirror that on the other side. So I'm stitched through both layers, and I'm going to clip now through both layers. So this is different from my raw edge where I separated the layers and clipped only through one. We're clipping through both layers. It's a little bit scary, but this is what we want to do. And we are going to cut maybe a scant 1/4 inch away from the stitching line. And then we want to clip into these seam allowances at our points and our curves, because we're going to be turning this fabric, this stabilizer fabric, to the right side. So we need to release these seam allowances so that it will lay flat. So every 1/4 inch or so, I'm clipping into the seam allowances up to, but not through, the stitching line to release those seam allowances. Try not to clip your stitching. I'm going to clip across that point. And then when we get down to my point at the bottom, I'm going to clip in right into that corner down there. And we're going to turn this right side out. And I'm going to need to bring my iron in to press this. So we're folding that right side out. Let me pull my iron in real quick. And as we are pulling this to the wrong side, if there's anywhere where the fabric won't press flat, if there are drag lines coming from your stitching, you know that you did not clip close enough to the stitching or frequently enough. So you might have to go back, turn that wrong side out again, and clip either closer to the stitching line or make your clips closer together. And at my point here, get my point turner, we're going to turn the point of our heart out. Make sure I get a nice crisp point on my heart. And I like to roll this fabric a little bit more toward the wrong side. So normally, you've got your seam right at the edge. For this, I like to have the seam rolled a little bit toward the wrong side so that you don't see this stabilizer fabric when you're looking at your finished product from the right side. And it looks like my clips were good. I'm not getting any drag lines anywhere. Now, at this point, after you get this all pressed, you could stitch around the edges and leave it. You don't actually need to put a fabric behind it. You could just create a little opening. Or you can put some fabric behind it to create a little extra visual interest, a little pop of color. So there is my heart opening. Hit it with a little bit more heat here, and then we will do our next step of stitching. All right, push my iron out. Okay. So like I said, you could now edge stitch. Get this out of here. You could edge stitch just close to that opening and leave it. Or let me find my fabric here. There. I like having a little print behind my solid fabric. I think that's a fun look. So I'm going to just edge stitch this, and let me throw, do I have any pins handy? I don't think I do. So you can pin this here. You can glue stick it. You can, temporary spray adhesive it to keep it from shifting at all while you are doing this final line of stitching. But because I'm using just such a small piece, I'm just going to bring it right to the machine. And here's, again, where you can add a little extra fun pizzazz. You can make your thread a nice contrasting color. You can use variegated thread. You can still, even with this folded edge technique, you can use a decorative stitch if that makes you happy. On my sample there that I showed, I stitched around twice, and I deviated from my first stitching line on the second pass to give it sort of a like hand-drawn kind of look. So that is a fun option. So I'm just keeping 1/8 of an inch or so away from the edge as I stitch. And again, as I'm going around my curves, With my needle down, I'm making small adjustments so I don't get any points along my curves, but rather just a nice, even, rounded line. And there at the point, stop with my needle down and pivot. And then as I approach where I began, my stitching, I just went over the beginning by another stitch or two. And there's my reverse applique. So then I could cut away both my applique fabric and my stabilizer fabric. I would trim that close to the stitching all the way around. And there I have just a little window through my main fabric to show that fun print behind. So the folded edge, so there's my other folded edge example. I used interfacing for that one as my stabilizing fabric to turn that before I added my decorative fabric. So I really like that look, that folded edge look. But depending on what you're going for, one of these other methods could be just what you need to add just a little bit more visual interest to something. So I always get questions about mending and mending techniques and altering techniques. So this is, like I said before, it's great for mending because if you have an article of clothing that you just love, but you know, you spilled something and you just have a little spot of something on your shirt, you can use this technique to not only cover up that one spot, but to make it look like, or to make it not look like you're just covering up a spot. You can do it in, a couple of different places around that area of your shirt, or, scatter it across the shirt to make it blend into the overall, aesthetic of the shirt. So there is some reverse applique methods. So I'm going to switch my camera over again. So it is as easy as that. It's a really quick and easy technique that can really change up the look of your garment or whatever project you're doing this on. So you can embellish your fabric, and then if you were, cutting out rectangles for a tote bag or a purse of some sort, embellish your fabric first, perhaps with some of these techniques, and then cut out your shapes and stitch it into your project, just to add something that is a little bit different and unique. So applique, traditional applique is a really fun way to do this as well, but the reverse applique, like I said, it adds a little bit of depth and dimension. So you can really see it on this one, maybe if my light isn't too crazy. You can really see the depth because it gives you sort of a shadow under that raw edge. And you can tell that the fabric is peeking out from behind. It's not just laid on top. So it's a fun way to create something different. So I hope you enjoy applying your reverse applique techniques, and I hope you find some really fun fabrics to combine, like my lace. I thought that was just a really fun way to add something. You could add this to a shoulder area to add like a little bit of detail that might be a little bit unexpected. So thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm Nicki LaFoille, and I hope to see you back here for some more quick projects and techniques in the future. So thanks again, and happy sewing.